Okay, so these examples that I'm going to do with you are for difference of squares. But in order for me to teach you the difference of squares, we're going to go forwards first and then backwards. So if we have multiplying like we've done in the past, you do the box, you get something and then something else, right? So, for instance, let's do this one using a box. I would have x plus 4, x minus 4, and then we start multiplying in. You don't have to copy this one. You would get x squared, you would get negative 4x, you would get positive 4x, and you would get negative 16. What happens with these two? You add them and then, but what happens when you have a positive 4 and a negative 4? What do you get when you add those two? 0. They cancel. Why? Because one is positive and the other one is negative, right? They're the same number, one's positive, one's negative. So you end up with just x squared minus 16. So let's write this down right here. I want you to write down x squared minus 4x plus 4x minus 16. These two cancel. So you end up with x squared minus 16. Okay, the next one, if I have 5m plus 1 and 5m minus 1, when I multiply these two, that's 25m squared. When I multiply these two, that's negative 5m. When I multiply these two, that's positive 5m. And when I multiply these two, that's a negative 1. What happens with these? They cancel, right? So it just leaves you with 25m squared minus 1. Let's write that down. So you have 25m squared minus 5m plus 5m minus 1. These cancel. So you end up with 25m squared minus 1. And then the last one, I'm not going to do the box, I'm just going to do the problems. 2a times 2a is 4a squared. 2a times negative 3b is a negative 6ab. And then I have a positive 6ab. And then I have a negative 9b squared. So the inside ones cancel. Because one's positive, one's negative, same numbers. So you end up with 4a squared minus 9b squared. Okay? So we're going to be working backwards. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that and what to look for. See, all of these answers resulted in difference of two squares. What does difference of two squares look like? Like that. Okay, the first one's going to be squared and the last one is squared, and in the middle you have a minus. That's why it's called difference, because it's a minus. Difference of two squares because they were both squared. Okay, so if you have this at the very beginning, which you will down here, you're going to have two answers. One's positive, one's negative, and then you just square them. So what's the square root of a squared? A and A. What's the square root of b squared? B and B. Okay? That's all we're going to do. We're going to separate them. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. Take the square root of the first one and take the square root of the last one. So before we start practicing, we're going to do some squares and square roots over here, just to make sure that you have them. So we're going to make a table of an A and an A square. A and A square. So we're going to be squaring stuff. So if I have a 1 What's 1 squared? 1 times 1? 1. What's 2 squared? 2 times 2? 4. What's 3 squared? 3 times 3? 9. What's 4 squared? 16. What's 5 squared? What's 6 squared? What's 7 squared? 49. Let's keep going. 8 squared? 64. 9 squared? 81. 10 squared? 100. 11 squared? 121. And 12 squared? 144. Okay, and there's more, right? Also, x is x squared, right? So if I find anything on this side, if I find any of these numbers in the problems that we do today, then we can take the difference of 2 squares. For instance, problem number 1. I see an a squared right here, and I see a 4 right here. That means I can take the difference of 2 squares because it has a minus, right? So then I'm going to do 2. One's a plus, one's a minus. What's the square root of a squared? The square root of a squared is just a. So a here, a here. What's the square root of 4? 2. 2 here, 2 here. We're done. That's the answer. You factored them. Okay? Let's do another one, number 2. There's a minus, so I can do the difference of 2 squares. This is a square and this is a square. So I'm going to do plus and minus. What's the square root of n squared? N and n. What's the square root of 64? It's 8. So 8 and 8. Done. Okay? Do we want to do one more? Let's do this one, number 9. There's a minus, right? This is a square, this is a square. So I can do the difference of 2 squares. One's plus, one's minus. What's the square root of 16? 4. 16 is right here, so 4 is the square root of it. And it has an a squared, so what's the square root of a squared? A. So one of them is going to have 4a, the other one's going to have 4a. What's the square root of 121? 11. So one has 11, the other one has 11. Done. What if it can't be done, right? What about number 5? Because this, I can take the square root of k squared, and I can take the square root of 25 as 5, right? But it has a plus. And that's not what I taught you. I told you that it's the difference of 2 squares, not the sum of 2 squares. So if this cannot be done, right, and I can't do the difference of 2 squares, then you're just going to put prime. That means it cannot be done. Okay, do we need to do one more? Let's do number 6. It has a minus, right? I can take the square root of 1, and I can take the square root of 49, and I can take the square root of y squared. So we're going to do the difference of 2 squares. What's the square root of 1? Look at 1. It's 1. So I'm going to put a 1 here and a 1 here, plus, minus. What's the square root of 49? 7. And what's the square root of y squared? Y. Done. Okay? So you're going to finish the whole front and the back. And there's a assignment in Schoology for, let me see, for these problems in the back. 1 through 12 in the back at the bottom are in Schoology. That means you have to put the answers in Schoology. I would put the answers on here first and then transfer them to Schoology So it's in courses, pick your course, and then it's right here where it says number 9, difference of squares. You click on it and you start and you put the answers. But work on the worksheet first and then transfer your answers onto here.